Hello everybody, Maven here. With the release of Lightfall, Bungie overhauled a handful of exotic armor pieces, and that's awesome, but there are still dozens in the game that are lackluster, underperforming, and neglected, and still need to be buffed. And Bungie obviously has access to the usage rate statistics of all the exotics, so they can clearly see there are a lot that see little to no play whatsoever. And if I was a lead Bungie dev, I would do my best to try to balance this all out. Every exotic deserves their chance to shine and deserves to see some use, because that's what Destiny 2 build crafting is all about. So today we'll be going over my personal list of exotics that I feel should be buffed, and I'll be giving some suggestions on how I would buff them. This is mainly going to be a PvE list, but I'll talk about PvP a few times in this video. Anyways, let me know in the comments down below which exotics you think should be buffed and how you would buff them. Without further ado, let's get to it. Hope you enjoy. So we're kicking things off with Titan here, with quite possibly the worst exotic in the entire game. The Mask of the Quiet One grants ability energy when you're damaged and also fully restores your health on kills when you're critically wounded. Now the ability regen is next to nothing, don't even bother. Now regaining maximum health on kills when critically wounded sounds appealing, but it doesn't say you fully regain health and shields. It's only health. So your shields are still going to be broken and you're still going to be in the red. So this exotic does pretty much nothing. Next is the Helm of Saint-14. Why does Bungie give some of the best ornaments to some of the worst exotics, I swear? So it blinds targets that enter your bubble and also gives you a void overshield when you leave your bubble. And as you can see here, when a target is blinded, they pretty much just walk backwards, thus leaving your bubble. And also these little trash mobs pretty much look like they're coded to just not run into your bubble. So I feel like it's kind of a useless exotic. It could use some help, and I really wish that it did something for your neutral game. Next is the ACDO feedback fence. Punching or being punched stores a charge that backfires on the enemy when they punch you. I tested this in the Conflux and I stored max charge, which I believe is 3, correct me if I'm wrong. But even at maximum charge, a low-level trash mob on Nessus wasn't one-shot by my ×3 charge when they punched me. That is embarrassing damage. And how often are you really getting punched in PvE? I mean, it happens, but not as much to warrant using this exotic. I really think they should change the wording on this thing so they don't make it when you get punched you release the shockwave, but when you take damage while surrounded. That very much helped the aping fantasy of Titans in PvE. You can go in there with either a glaive, a sidearm, or an SMG right into the heat of battle, and you're letting off explosions all over the place when you're surrounded. I think that would be awesome. Next is the Peacekeepers. Now hold on a second, I know they're god tier in Crucible, but they do pretty much nothing in PvE. So what they do is they give your SMGs intrinsic auto-loading holster and also pretty much max out their handling. They ready instantly and they get airborne effectiveness. That's a lot of good stuff for SMGs, but not enough for PvE. Now there are a lot of exotics in the game that either do a lot in Crucible and nothing in PvE, and vice versa. And I believe that this should be a game of balance where you're able to build craft and use any exotic in any type of game mode, not just being one-sided. So it could definitely use some help for PvE, and I think I have an idea that would admittedly make it a little bit more broken in Crucible. But the whole theme of Peacekeepers is that, you know, you reload it instantly, it has auto-loading holster, so it's assuming that you're going to be swapped off of your SMG for a while and using a different weapon. So therefore, if you're getting kills with a different weapon, I think that the Peacekeeper should give all your SMGs intrinsic harmony. So when you swap back to that, ready it instantly, have it auto-load, it will have a nice little damage buff, and that will help the ad clear potential of it for PvE. Next is the Crest of Alpha Lupi that generates more orbs on your super kills and also gives you health back when you cast your barricade. Now admittedly, the orb generation on your super is nice, but getting health back on your barricade has one flaw. It says you only get the health back when you cast your barricade, not your class ability. Now why does that matter? Because we've got a handy little class ability now called Thruster. Crest of Alpha Lupi does not work with Thruster, and if it did, it'd pretty much be like a Titan version of Wormhusk Crown. If that was a thing, I would main that in Crucible. I think that would be awesome. On to the Hallowfire Heart. It increases your solar ability regeneration rate, but even more so when your super is full. Now similar to the Mask of the Quiet One, the ability regeneration is next to nothing, don't even bother, but when your super is full, the ability regen is actually pretty respectable, it's pretty nice. However, how often are you really going to have your super up? When you have your super, you're probably going to cast it. And secondly, the ability regen in Heart of Inmost Light is just better. In the Heart of Inmost Light, you can also buff your abilities and buff your barricade's health And also, you don't have to use it on only Solar, you can use it on any subclass, and it puts in so much work. So there's literally no reason to use the Hallowfire Heart when the Heart of Endless Light exists. Next up is Severence Enclosure, and oh, how the mighty have fallen. So powered melee kills make a damaging explosion, but even more damage and a bigger explosion when you kill a fatter target. This thing was actually awesome back in the day when it was bugged on Arc Titan, but now with Arc 3.0 out, it doesn't work like that anymore. It also feels like it's a little bit buggy or has a cooldown, because sometimes I'll get a powered melee final blow and it won't cause them to explode. So it really doesn't do as much as you'd want it to. I'd rather use something like Dune Marchers. Next up is the Khepri's Horn, where your barricade sends out a wave of fire. And they even buffed this thing recently to add Scorch, but even when you have Ember of Ashes, it does not deal enough Scorch to cause a solar ignition. The damage on it is so bad and it whiffs more often than not. They should honestly change the animation so it sends out 3 waves of fire, similar to the Dead Messenger, like in a diagonal pattern, cover a lot more area, and it should deal enough Scorch to cause a solar ignition. And on to the Icefall Mantle that replaces your barricade with an overshield type ability and also slows down your movement when you do so, and your barricade does not recharge when you do so. Now the overshield it gives is pretty nice and tanky. It's similar to that of Woven Mail, and I think that your barricade not recharging while you have the overshield is a fine enough drawback. However, I hate the fact that it slows your movement when you have the overshield. That is its biggest downside, and I honestly think that is unnecessary. That is the thing that really makes Icefall Mantle unusable. But Maven, if Bungie removes the movement penalty, won't Icefall Mantle be broken in Crucible? Well, think about this. Void Titans already have an overshield in every engagement, plus they don't have to lose their barricade ability, so they got a wall to hide behind and get reses with. And Arc Titans are sprinting at you with Antaeus and a Juggernaut overshield, and their movement isn't impaired. In fact, it's actually improved. Plus, their barricade regen doesn't have a penalty, whereas Icefall Mantle does. So if they removed the movement penalty from Icefall Mantle, it wouldn't be broken in Crucible because the options that already exist are already better. But the great thing is that the Icefall Mantle would actually be viable in PvE. Next up, the Precious Scars. It creates a burst of healing when you get a weapon final blow with the damage type matching your subclass energy, and also when you revive an ally, you guys get overshields. So the healing you get back on final blows is pretty pitiful. It only gives you like 20 HP. But I think that it should give you like around 80 or 100, something comparable to the Wormhusk Crown on final blows. I think that'd be great. And also for the reviving aspect of it, that's kind of the whole theme of Precious Scars is reviving, so I feel like it should make it so you revive allies instantly. Like, you know, when you have to revive an ally, you have to hold down a button over them and a little meter goes up. I think with the Precious Scars, it should be instant. Like, you only just press a button and they instantly get revived. I think that'd be awesome. And now we move on to Hunter. Starting off with the Raiju's Harness, you can deactivate your Arc Staff to create a blinding explosion and give your Arc weapons a ×4 buff. So the damage buff it gives to your Arc weapons is 25%, but you know what also does that? Eternal Warrior, Mask of Bacchus, even using just Surge mods can be more efficient. Having to fully charge your super and then use it but not actually use it and deactivate it for a 25% damage buff for 10 seconds is definitely way too much to ask for. On to the Blight Ranger. Now I know I said the Mask of the Quiet One was the worst exotic in the game, but the Blight Ranger easily tops it. So it says the attacks you reflect with your Arc Staff deal massively increased damage. Now testing out against Karl, it does pretty much nothing. Like in that amount of time of casting your super, a Kvostov would have done way more DPS. It is ridiculous. Like it actually hurts you to use the Blight Ranger. Like it actually nerfs you. You should just use your Arc Staff for what it is. It would do much more. Bungie just needs to entirely overhaul this exotic, like completely drop what it does and turn it into something new. Next up is a Mechaneer's Tricksleeves. When you swap to a sidearm while critically wounded, it gains double damage, straight up a 100% damage buff, and also gives you airborne effectiveness for sidearms. Now it's pretty much Peacekeepers, but for sidearms, except Peacekeepers doesn't give you a double damage buff when you swap to it. That's what it should do. But still, despite me talking up the Tricksleeves like this, it definitely has its problems. Swapping to a sidearm while critically wounded is just way too much to ask for. That is such a hassle. Like, Bungie needs to change that ability so that it's a lot easier to proc. But having a very easy to proc 100% damage buff could be a problem. Just make it easier to proc but lessen the damage buff. I think that'd be a fine trade-off. Next up is sealed Ahamkara Grasps. Dealing melee damage reloads your currently equipped weapon, and your charged melee final blows will reload all of your weapons. Now it's pretty cool that this works with glaives. Your glaive hits will auto-reload the glaive, But it's definitely trying to be a burst DPS exotic to help you get off like one more rocket in the damage phase. But if you're trying to burst DPS, why would you use the sealed Ahamkara Grasp over something like the Star Rider skills? Because that's definitely going to more benefit your burst damage. So why even use this thing? It's like not even niche. There's just no reason at all to use it. On to the Renewal Grasp. It increases your dust-filled grenade's radius and gives you resist when you're standing in it, and nerfs the enemy's damage output when they're standing in it. Now this thing was broken when it first came out. Bungie had to nerf it within a month of its inception because it was so oppressive, but I think they over-nerfed it. And it does almost nothing now. In fact, a normal dust-filled grenade is even better than a renewal dust-filled grenade because the Renewal Grasp actually nerfs the cooldown of your dust field. It really slows it down. And with the normal dust field, it recharges so much quicker, and it's not too much different. So honestly, it would be a fine exotic if they just removed the cooldown penalty. Next up is a Khepri Sting, and another Mighty has fallen. So punching someone with the full smoke bomb charge will cast your smoke bomb. Your smoke bomb deals increased damage and regenerates more quickly when it's stuck to a surface, and grants you true sight after damaging a target with it. Now this thing used to be broken in Crucible, where you could just smoke bomb slam and instantly you can see everybody through walls. It was literally the legal wall hacks. But now you have to actually throw your smoke bomb at somebody and hit them with it to be able to have true sight for like 4 seconds. But if you hit them with your smoke bomb, you can already see them. There's just no point. I mean, you could stick it to a surface and hope a Titan runs around the corner trying to ape somebody and they run into your smoke bomb, and then you can suddenly see through walls when you weren't anticipating to, when it doesn't even help you. And it does say your smoke bomb recharges quicker when it's stuck to a surface. Now call me crazy, but I don't think it actually does. I think it's actually bugged and doesn't give you any regen at all. If it does, it may just be like a couple extra seconds. It's not even worth it. Now, some people are going to hate this idea, but I think it should go back to giving you wall hacks when you smoke bomb slam in Crucible. However, I think that it should just have a much bigger drawback. Like, what if it had the Icefall Mantle effect, where when you were invis, your smoke bomb energy doesn't actually charge? And then also, when you did that smoke bomb slam and got wall hacks, I think that it should give you some kind of like debuff for like 10 seconds where it just removes your radar. Like, yeah, you can see through walls for like 4 seconds, but then you got a few extra seconds of like no radar. So it kind of hinders you for doing that. I think these would be perfectly fine trade-offs for being able to see through walls for 4 seconds. Next, we got the Gwisin Vest. Each Spectral Blade kill you make before going invis will extend the duration of your super. So you can go invis by doing the heavy attack, but then you got to do your light attack to get out of invis and then go back into it. Now, when used effectively, it pretty much doubles the duration of your super, but the problem is, it's Spectral Blades. It's like the second worst PvE super in the entire game. And this is on Void Hunter. Like, why are you going to choose to use Spectral Blades when Tether is literally one of the best PvE supers in the game? But unfortunately, this exotic I think is doomed. I think it's beyond saving because it's based around Spectral Blades. So either Bungie needs to overhaul it and make this exotic do something entirely different, or they need to give Spectral Blades like a 90% damage buff. And if they don't do either of those things, then unfortunately, I think this exotic will never see play. On to the Gemini Jesters. Dodging disorients nearby enemies and temporarily removes their radar. Now, this is already a decent PvP exotic, but for PvE, it is absolutely laughable. You dodge within 10 meters of an enemy and it blinds them for like 3 seconds. Like, at that point, I would rather use no exotic armor and just use armor that can help me improve my stats, because my stats have way more value than this junk. So what I think this should do in PvE is that when you dodge within 20 meters of a combatant, it should blind them for 5 seconds. And additionally, it should say that whenever you defeat a blinded combatant, you get class ability, like 50% of your class ability. So you get 2 kills and then you can immediately dodge again. And you can go on this train of like dodging, killing blinded enemies, dodging, killing blinded enemies, and just dodge the whole room. I think that'd be a pretty cool fantasy to have. And I don't think that would be broken, because there's things like ultras, champions, mini bosses, and bosses that cannot be blinded, so this would only really be for ad clear. Next up is the Stompies, and yes, I know this is the point where everybody hits dislike. Is this just gonna be another rant from a PvP Hunter main complaining? Absolutely, yes it is. I think the nerf they added where you lose your movement when you dodge is absolutely unnecessary. Take Titans, for example. They make up like 99.9% of Crucible. I mean, that's kind of an exaggeration, but you get it. They see so much more play in competitive PvP than the other classes do combined. And they got broken exotics like the Antaeus Wards, PKs, OEM, Dune Marchers. And suddenly Stompies are the problem? Is Bungie high? Like, how can Stompies abilities get nerfed, but Antaeus wards don't get nerfed. Like, can you really argue that? Let me know down in the comments if you can argue that. And finally, moving on to Warlock, starting off with the Getaway Artist. You can consume your grenade and turn it into an arc soul and become amplified. Now, this is another exotic that is pretty good in Crucible, but for PvE, it definitely is lacking. So, since you're amplified, your arc soul becomes sentient, thus fires more quickly. But your normal Arc Soul Rift can do the same thing when you're amplified. When you're amplified, your Rift gives you a sentient Arc Soul that is the same thing as Getaway Artist. And you know how stupidly easy it is to become amplified these days? It's basically free. So there's pretty much no reason to use Getaway Artist in PvE since your Rift already makes the sentient Arc Souls for you very consistently. So I think that the Arc Soul from Getaway Artist should actually fire even quicker. The normal Arc Soul is a 3-round burst, the sentient Arc Soul is a 6-round burst. I think the Getaway Artist should be a 9-round burst. Next up is a Crown of Tempests, where your arc ability or jolt final blows increase the recharge rate of your arc abilities, and also you increase the duration of your storm trance. Now this is a good exotic, I will admit that. It's not bad, but the Fallen Sunstar does its job better. You get way more ability regen on Fallen Sunstar, plus the ability regen also helps out your teammates and increases their abilities as well. So if you negate that ability off of the Crown of Tempest, the only thing left over is the increased duration to Storm Trance, which below Spectral Blades is the worst super in the entire game. So you're not going to be using Storm Trance in PvE, you're going to be using the Chaos Reach. So there's no reason to use this exotic when the Fallen Sunstar exists. And moving on to the Stormdancer's Brace, where each Storm Trance kill you make gives you an escalating boost to your Storm Trance damage. Same argument, Storm Trance is not a super you want to be using in PvE. And despite you escalating your damage, it still does pretty terrible damage. At that point, I'd rather use the Crown of Tempest, where I can improve the duration of the Storm Trance and also improve my arc abilities, but then I wouldn't use either because I would just use the Fallen Sunstar. On to the Apotheosis Veil. Just like Blight Ranger and Mask of the Quiet One, this is definitely in the bottom 3 exotics in the entire game. So you immediately regenerate your health and all your abilities when you cast your super. Cool, dude. I throw out my melee grenade and rift, I cast my super, and suddenly they're all back. Wow. You know, I could just use Fallen Sunstar and get all my abilities back so much quicker. So again, there's no reason to use this thing. It is just trash. It doesn't matter what subclass you're on. On to Dawn Chorus. It improves your Daybreak projectiles damage, and also your Scorch deals increased damage and refunds melee energy whenever you scorch a target. So I have tried time and time again to make Dawn Chorus work. I've wanted to make a video on this thing for so long, but every time I build with it, I just cannot justify making it into a video. I want to love this thing, I really do. And to be honest, the Daybreak projectile damage is actually ridiculous on this, and you should give it a try. It's kind of like Crest of the Falling Star, but for Warlock. It just straight up like doubles your super's damage. It's no joke. But the part that says your Scorch deals increased damage is useless because Scorch doesn't deal that much damage. It is the ignitions that do. That's the whole reason we Scorch things in the first place. And Dawn Chorus doesn't say that you produce more Scorch stacks, it just increases the Scorch's damage. And I really wish they would make that change. That would really break a lot of different abilities in the game, and also make weapons like Polaris Lance and Skyburner's Oath and Prometheus Lens a lot better. On to Eye of Another World. It just improves all of your ability regenerates, and just like a lot of the other disappointing exotics in today's video, the recharge rate that it grants is pretty negligible. And yeah, it's nice to have improved recharge rate, but I'd rather use something like Verity's Brow, which you can also use on any subclass, and that gives you a better recharge rate, and your nade is the most important thing. If I'm playing Stasis, I'm going to use Osmiomancies. If I'm playing Arc, I'm going to use Fallen Sunstar. If I'm playing Void, you got a multitude of options. You got Controverse Hold, you got Nezarec Sin. There's so many different things you can run for ability regen. There's just no reason to pick Eye of Another World. Moving on to the Karnstein Armlets, your melee kills restore a chunk of health and produce health regeneration for, I believe, 7 seconds. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now you can see in the background gameplay that my Celestial Fire doesn't proc the Karnstein Armlets. It's a little bit buggy, Celestial Fire. But anyways, the Karnstein Armlets are actually amazing with glaives. It's more of a glaive exotic these days because it's too hard to proc the perk without a glaive because there's nothing on the Karnsteins that increases your melee damage. But I feel that the best way to buff the Karnstein Armlets is it should say that when you have Vampire's Caress active, final blows will restore a portion of your melee energy. So you can try to go on a spree with that healing and try to restore your melee ability so that you can proc the Vampire's Crest perk again and try to chain it back to back. And that'd make it more effective for ad clear, which is kind of its purpose. Moving on to the Wings of Sacred Dawn, you can ADS a weapon midair to linger there and have some resist. Now there's one big glaring problem with this exotic that it doesn't take a genius to figure out. But you're on solar, you have to use solar to use this exotic, so when you're on solar, you might as well just use Heat Rises. Heat Rises does its job better. It heals you when you proc it. It restores your melee energy while you're in the air. It gives you a second Icarus dash. Like, why use the Wings of Sacred Dawn when Heat Rises does what it can do and more? Now, I do have a pretty solid idea on how to buff Wings of Sacred Dawn, and some of the PvP sweats watching may not agree. But remember back in the day when we had 2 Icarus dashes by default? Yeah, the Wings of Sacred Dawn should just give us 2 Icarus dashes, you know, just intrinsically. I think that'd be awesome. Make it into a movement exotic. Next up is a Chromatic Fire. Your precision kinetic final blows will release an explosion that does something different based on your subclass. Now, Bungie did just overhaul this exotic recently, and I appreciate that, but it's definitely not enough. All of the effects it gives are pretty neat, but I feel like it could still do more and have a bigger radius and so on and so forth. Now, what I feel they should add to this is, you know how Eternal Warrior escalates your arc damage and Path of Burning Steps escalates your solar damage? I feel like this should do that for kinetics. I think that'd be amazing. Moving on to Promethium Spur, and forget everything I said before in this video. Promethium Spur is absolutely the worst exotic in the entire game. When you defeat enemies with your Daybreak super, it creates an Empowering Rift and Healing Rift at the target's location. And when you're standing in a rift, any solar weapon final blows will grant you rift energy. And I feel like this exotic is bugged. I've tested it on multiple occasions and it feels like it rarely ever grants you rift energy, and when it does, it's not that much. And then this exotic also forces you to use one of the worst supers in the entire game, Daybreak. Daybreak's only good when you use it with Dawn Chorus. And the rifts it generates on super final blows is such a meh ability. It's just a bad exotic that barely rewards you for playing the worst super. Like, how much worse can it get? Next is a Vesper of Radius, another exotic that got overhauled with the release of Lightfall, and you know, it's pretty interesting. I think it'd be decent with the glaive, but still very underwhelming. Like you can see against Carl, it just hardly does any damage. All the damage you see me doing to Carl is basically from my Arc Soul, not from the Rift. I think that what they need to do to this thing is just massively increase your Rift's radius. I mean, it's called the Vesper of Radius after all. Next is a Nothing Manacles. It gives you a second scatter grenade charge and gives you better tracking for your scatter grenade projectiles. Now, it doesn't give you any sort of additional regeneration methods of the scatter grenades, and scatter grenades are already some of the worst PvE grenades in the game. Now let's get this straight. It is a Void Lock exotic gauntlet that improves a grenade. Doesn't that sound familiar? Yeah, Controverse Hold. The Controverse Hold allows you to run arguably the best PvE grenade in the entire game. The Vortex Grenade also gives you a ability regeneration method that is very effective and pretty much gives you infinite Void Grenade charges, and it deals more damage, and it can proc Echo of Undermining longer, and it sucks in enemies. It's just better in every possible way. The Nothing Manacles has nothing on the Controverse Hold. Now, what I think the Nothing Manacles needs is not only should it improve the tracking of the projectiles, but it should spawn additional projectiles. Not only that, I think that your scatter grenades should make enemies volatile on hit. And if possible, I believe it should also give you some sort of method to helping your scatter grenade ability cooldown. And the last exotic of the day is the Skull of Dire Ahamkara. Nova Bomb kills restore some super energy. And you can see here from the background gameplay, it is really not that much super energy. I mean, I get a decent chunk, but you can see these Seekers go and hit some other enemies, and you can see how much each individual kill actually grants, and it is not good. Now, first of all, who's really using a Nova Bomb for ad clear? Secondly, what I think this thing could use is the Shards of Galanor treatment. You know, with Shards of Galanor, you don't actually have to get kills to refund super energy, you just need to get hits, because you're going to be using your Nova Bomb against a fatter target to do some damage to like a boss. subclass. And when you do, those little projectiles and the blast radius from the Nova Bomb explosion could kill some trash mobs around the room, and you'll actually get a pretty decent amount of super energy back, but nope, that's not a thing. Now, on to the wrap up. So there are a lot of exotics today where it's like, why use this when that exists? You know what I mean? Like, there are multiple exotics for like each subclass, each ability, where it's like there's multiple exotics fighting over the same role, the same purpose, and one will always do the job better than the other. But I feel like this should definitely be a more balanced game. You know, like I said earlier, freedom of build crafting. We should be able to use every exotic for its own unique purpose. But I understand as more and more exotics get into the game, some of them will end up overlapping, and I guess that's just a part of it, but Bungie may be able to do something to add more uniqueness to some of these exotics. And every exotic in the game that is based around a specific super should have some effect on your neutral game, because then there's no reason to have that exotic equipped, because you're going to have a beneficial neutral game exotic equipped, and when you're ready to cast your super, you're just going to go into your menu and hot swap over. There has to be a reason to keep the same exotic on at all times. But there's not, and I think that's just kind of unhealthy for the game, in my opinion. And something I talked about earlier when I was talking about Peacekeepers is there are a lot of unbalanced exotics in the game that you only have to use in one game mode because they do nothing in the other. There needs to be a use for everything in both PvE and PvP, and they can easily do that with use of terms like combatants versus guardians, or if you combine the two together to make enemies, you can pertain to different things and change the wording on a lot of exotics so that they can have uses in both game modes. So once again, thank you to Bungie for all of the awesome overhauls they brought with the release of Lightfall. It's very exciting, especially for a build crafter such as myself, but there is still a lot of work to be done. There were a lot of exotics that were either untouched or not touched enough. So let me know down in the comments if I might have missed any exotics, and how would you tune these exotics? What would you do to buff them or change them? I'd like to know your thoughts. So that's going to do for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit the like button and drop a comment, because YouTube sees these actions as interactions, and these interactions help the algorithm and help the video do better, so I really appreciate it. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. Would love to have you here. And with that, I'll catch you in the next video. See you later.